The smartest person in the room is usually wrong. That sounds backward. And yet, when we sit with it for a moment, it starts to feel oddly familiar. Not about the math, not about the logic, not about the data they can recite from memory. They might be wrong about something far more dangerous, themselves. Let me introduce you to a peculiar blind spot that nobody talks about. We've all grown up watching the same movies. The detective who notices the microscopic thread on the suspect's sleeve, the chess grandmaster who predicts 17 moves ahead, the scientist who cracks the code while everyone else fumbles in the dark. And here's the thing these characters all share. They're not just brilliant at their craft, they seem to be brilliant at everything. They understand people, they control their emotions, they navigate life with the same precision they apply to their puzzles. Intelligence arrives as a complete package. Somewhere along the way, we started believing this was how intelligence actually works. It might be one of the most expensive lies we've ever inherited. Picture the genius as Hollywood has painted them. Sherlock Holmes doesn't just solve crimes, he predicts human behavior like a weather forecast. Spock doesn't just calculate faster than computers, he maintains perfect emotional equilibrium. Their intelligence appears to turn inward just as effectively as it turns outward. They read rooms, they read people, they read themselves. Occasionally a small flaw is added, a touch of arrogance, a mild social awkwardness, just enough imperfection to make them interesting, but the underlying message remains intact. If you are intelligent, the story goes, you see the world more clearly. And if you see the world more clearly, you must also see yourself more clearly. And if you see yourself clearly, then surely you are better equipped to move through life competently. This is a beautiful story. It might also be a fairy tale. What if mathematical intelligence and emotional intelligence are as different from each other as soccer is from basketball? Both involve a ball, both require coordination. But being a world-class striker tells us absolutely nothing about whether you can sink a three-pointer. These are separate games with separate rules, separate muscles, separate years of practice required. Yet somehow we've convinced ourselves that the brain works differently. That if you can integrate calculus in your head, you must certainly be able to integrate the conflicting desires of your own heart. Let me paint a picture that might help us think about this differently. We might imagine two cars lined up at the start of a winding mountain road. One is a Bugatti, a masterpiece of engineering capable of speeds that defy the imagination. The other is a modest Toyota, reliable but undeniably slow. Now imagine that we take the steering wheel out of the Bugatti. In this hypothetical race, which car do we think reaches the finish line safely? The Bugatti has the power to reach the destination in record time, but without the ability to navigate the curves, its speed only serves to propel it off the cliff faster. The Toyota, while slower, possesses the mechanism to adjust, to turn, and to stay on the path. Now let me walk you through 4 quiet forces that might work against those who have been given the gift of high intelligence. These aren't character flaws. They're more like invisible currents that push against swimmers without their knowledge. The first is the weight of expectation. When society has labeled you smart, something subtle happens. Others expect you to be competent at everything. And because we tend to see ourselves through the mirror of how others see us, you might begin expecting the same. You solved the equation, so surely you can solve the relationship. You aced the test, so surely you understand why you feel insecure. But what happens when competence fails to materialize? When the smart person makes a deeply foolish decision about their career, their health, their love? Instead of curiosity, something more dangerous might emerge: distortion. The mind that's used to being right struggles to process being wrong. Rather than updating the map, it might redraw the territory. Rather than saying, maybe I'm not good at this specific thing, it whispers, the situation was unusual, or others failed me, or it wasn't really a failure if you think about it correctly. The intelligence that solves problems becomes the intelligence that explains them away. Consider 2 travelers lost in a forest. One believes they have no sense of direction. The other believes they have an excellent one. Which traveler asks for a map? If you've been told your whole life that you're smart and you've internalized that identity, you might not feel the same burning need to learn, to study, to seek out YouTube tutorials and books and mentors. The person who believes they're missing something will search for it. The person who believes they already possess it might wait for it to simply appear. This creates a strange paradox. The less confidence you have in your natural abilities, the more you might develop them through deliberate effort. The more confidence you have, the more you might coast on what seems to come naturally. Over time, the tortoise might genuinely overtake the hare. not through superior genetics, but through superior hunger. The third is the occasional delivery. This might be the cruelest mechanism of all. If intelligence never worked, the illusion would shatter quickly. You'd simply be wrong over and over until the pattern became undeniable. But intelligence does work sometimes, maybe even often. You see a situation, apply your analytical mind, and navigate it successfully. Your prediction comes true, your strategy pays off, and each time this happens, a little voice whispers, "See? The system works. Intelligence equals competence. You were right all along." When intelligence occasionally confirms the belief that intelligence equals competence, then each small victory can push self-examination further into the future. Each win becomes another delay, another reason to not examine the underlying belief, another piece of evidence that confirms the fairy tale. Even if you're wrong 40% of the time about things that really matter, that 60% success rate might feel like vindication. The occasional delivery might be more dangerous than consistent failure. At least failure forces a reckoning. The fourth force may be the most treacherous of all. Imagine a master locksmith who can open any door, an extraordinary skill when used to enter places you should enter, a catastrophic skill when used to break into places you should never go. Intelligence works the same way. The mind that can construct airtight arguments can construct them in any direction, including directions that lead straight off a cliff. When emotion takes the wheel, intelligence doesn't step aside. It becomes a servant, a highly capable servant working for a new master. And here's what makes this so dangerous. The smarter you are, the more sophisticated the cage you can build around yourself without ever realizing you're the one holding the lock. Consider how rationalization actually works. A feeling arises. Fear, desire, resentment, longing. The feeling wants something. Maybe it wants you to quit when you should persist. Maybe it wants you to stay when you should leave. Maybe it wants you to send that message at 2 a.m. that you'll regret by sunrise. A less sophisticated mind might simply act on the impulse and later recognize it as foolish. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let my emotions get the better of me. But a sophisticated mind, it doesn't experience the emotion as emotion. It experiences a sudden flood of extremely compelling reasons. Arguments materialize, evidence arranges itself, counter-arguments get dismantled before they fully form, the conclusion feels inevitable, logical, almost mathematical. You're not following your fear, you're following the data, obviously. Tolkien understood something about this when he wrote that a betrayer would first betray himself. The con artist who lies to 1,000 people eventually loses track of truth entirely. The blade turns inward, the locksmith picks their own pockets. There's a strange mercy in being average at deception. You can't fool yourself very well either. But brilliance at constructing narratives, that brilliance doesn't check who the audience is. It performs just as well for an audience of one. Just as well when that audience is you. Sitting alone, convincing yourself that the terrible decision is actually the wise one. The most intelligent person in the room might also be the most thoroughly deceived. Not by anyone else, by the very machinery they're so proud of. And the worst part, the better the rationalization, the less it feels like rationalization. It just feels like thinking clearly, finally seeing the situation for what it really is. Everyone else is emotional. You're just being logical. That might be the moment you're furthest from the truth. If we could walk through history with different eyes, we might notice something uncomfortable. The landscape is littered with extraordinary minds that stumbled in strangely ordinary ways. The physicist who revolutionizes our understanding of the universe but can't maintain a single healthy relationship. The chess champion who dominates the board but makes catastrophic decisions about money. The CEO who builds an empire but destroys their reputation in the process. We tend to separate these. Well, they were a genius at work, just not at life. But maybe that separation is exactly the point. Maybe we've been treating genius as a transferable currency when it might actually be more like a local dialect, fluent in calculus, illiterate in emotions. The truly interesting question isn't why brilliant people sometimes fail, it's why we're surprised when they do. So what might we do with this awareness? Perhaps the first step is simply seeing the Bugatti for what it is, extraordinary in certain ways, incomplete in others. Power and direction are different things, and confusing them has costs. Someone might be a genius at pattern recognition but a novice at self-reflection, a master of logic but an amateur at empathy, a virtuoso at strategy but a beginner at listening to their own body's signals that something is wrong. this isn't a tragedy. It might even be freeing. Once you stop expecting your chess brain to automatically handle your emotional life, you can actually start learning. You can bring the same curiosity you'd bring to any new subject. You can seek teachers, make mistakes, accumulate the specific kind of wisdom that doesn't come bundled with IQ points. The genius can become a student again, not of mathematics or physics or law, a student of themselves. We might live in a world that worships velocity. How fast can you calculate? How quickly can you solve? How rapidly can you climb? But there's another kind of speed that rarely makes the highlight reel. How fast can you catch yourself when you're heading in the wrong direction? How quickly can you notice that your brilliant plan has a fundamental flaw? How rapidly can you update your beliefs when reality sends a contradicting message? This is the steering wheel nobody talks about. It's not glamorous. It doesn't show up on standardized tests. Hollywood would never build a franchise around it. But it might be the difference between the Bugatti that crashes and the Toyota that actually arrives. Perhaps the most intelligent thing a smart person can do is assume they are not a performance of humility, not false modesty designed to be charming, a genuine operating assumption that in any given domain, especially the domain of understanding themselves, they might be working with less than they think. The hunger returns when you assume you're missing something. The distortions become harder when you're looking for them. The occasional deliveries lose their hypnotic power when you remember that sometimes isn't always. This doesn't mean discounting advantages. It means contextualizing them, recognizing that the engine is magnificent, but the steering wheel needs separate attention, separate practice, separate respect, and maybe that's the real question worth sitting with. Not, how smart am I, but how well can I actually navigate? Because the fastest car in the world is currently sitting in a ditch somewhere. The driver is probably explaining brilliantly why it wasn't their fault, why the road was poorly designed, why the GPS gave bad directions, why technically, if you look at it from a certain angle, this isn't really a ditch at all. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a modest vehicle with a working steering wheel quietly pulls into the finish line. The speedometer never told you what direction you were heading, and the smartest person in the room might still be wrong about the only person they'll never be able to fully see: themselves.